And we've just had to cut into that report to bring you a live press conference in Moscow. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, speaking during the visit of the UN Secretary-General. Let's take a listen to what they're saying.
The UN, after the contacts between the UN Secretary-General with our Ministry of Defense, which happened almost 2 months ago, we have agreed and we have created a working group that is based here in Moscow at our Ministry of Defense. UN representatives agree on specific things, negotiate specific things that allow to safely deliver humanitarian aid through the UN, through Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. OCHA managed to launch 5 such humanitarian convoys. They were dispatched to different regions of the Ukraine, in addition to the humanitarian aid that is daily being given out to Ukrainian citizens and Donetsk and Luhansk as well, naturally, through Russian military, Russian Ministry of Defense and Emergency Ministry and other NGOs of Russia. Today we have discussed possible actions, how to strengthen our cooperation on this track, and I think that as the outcome of negotiations in Moscow, we'll be able to define what kind of steps we can take, whether they will be relevant in the current situation. Naturally, we talked about the future of the UN in general, about those attempts of our Western colleagues, first and foremost, to place the discussion of crucial matters outside of universal formats, outside of the UN and system, creating, rubber-stamping different partnerships and institutions, and issuing calls who have been presented as the forefront of humanity, as the select few. And the same way goes for the alliance of multilateralists promoted by Germany and France. Is it not in competition with the UN? As well as the US initiative, who last year held a summit for democracy. They issued invitations on their own without consulting anyone. And we have called the attention of our partners today during the negotiations. This is an alarm bell for the UN. This is an attempt to cross out the basic rules of the UN Charter, the basic principles of the UN Charter. And that is that the organization was created on the basis of sovereign equality of states. This is enshrined in the UN Charter, and we have to remind about that. We'll do that more often, so that no one, neither in New York nor in other member countries, would forget about that. And in the end, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the UN Secretary-General, who has initiated such contact. We have readily responded, and that highlights the great significance that we attach to regular dialogue and comparing notes with the leadership of the UN Secretariat. I think that through all difficulties that continue to multiply in global affairs, such a frank and honest discussion is very, very useful, so that in the end we could go back to the sources, to the UN Charter, and on the basis of this Charter we could build any kind of mechanism how to develop multilateralism. Multilateralism today is one of the key terms. Once again, I'd like to thank Secretary-General for giving this framework for today's conversation. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the press, as Secretary-General of the United Nations, I came to Moscow as a messenger of peace. My objective and my agenda is strictly linked to save lives and to reduce suffering. I had a very frank discussion with the Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, and it is clear that there are two different positions on what is happening in Ukraine. According to the Russian Federation, what is taking place is a special military operation with the objectives that were announced. According to the UN, in line with the resolutions passed by the General Assembly, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is a violation of its territorial integrity and against the Charter of the United Nations. But it is my deep conviction that the sooner we end this war, the better, for the people of Ukraine, for the people of the Russian Federation, and those far beyond. The United Nations has repeatedly called for ceasefires to protect civilians and to facilitate a political dialogue to reach a solution. So far, that has not been possible. Today, across the Donbass, a violent battle is underway with tremendous death and destruction. Many civilians are being killed, and hundreds of thousands of people are in life-threatening conditions trapped by the conflict. I'm concerned about the repeated reports of violations of international humanitarian and human rights law and possible war crimes, and they require independent investigation for effective accountability. And we urgently need humanitarian corridors that are truly safe and effective and that are respected by all to evacuate civilians and deliver much-needed assistance. To that end, I have proposed the establishment of a humanitarian contact group bringing together the Russian Federation, Ukraine and the United Nations to look for opportunities for the opening of safe corridors with local cessation of hostilities and to guarantee that they are actually effective. Simultaneously, we recognize that we face a crisis within a crisis in Mariupol. Thousands of civilians are in dire need of life-saving humanitarian assistance and many of evacuation. The United Nations is ready to fully mobilize its human and logistical resources to help save lives in Mariupol. My proposal is for a coordinated work of the United Nations, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and Ukraine and Russian Federation forces to enable the safe evacuation of those civilians who want to leave, both inside the Azovstal plan and in the city, in any direction they choose, and to deliver the humanitarian aid required. And this is not just about what is happening in Ukraine, as we are seeing shockwaves around the world. The dramatic acceleration of the increase of the prices for food and energy that was already taking place in the last year are causing enormous suffering to hundreds of millions of the most vulnerable people worldwide. And this comes on top of the shock of the continued COVID-19 pandemic and the uneven access to resources for recovery that particularly penalize developing countries around the world. And so the sooner peace is established, the better for the sake of Ukraine, Russia, and for the world. And it's very important, even in these moments of difficulty, to keep alive the values of multilateralism. We need a world that is multipolar, with multilateral institutions, and those multilateral institutions must abide by the UN Charter and by international law. And abiding by the UN Charter and by international law, recognizing full equality among states, they hopefully will be an instrument that will allow us once again to come together as humankind and address the dramatic challenges we face, from climate change to epidemics and to many others, and in which the only war we should have would be a war of those that put the planet at risk.
Уважаемые коллеги, переходим к вопросам. Пожалуйста, India Today.
Moving on to questions, please, India Today.
I am Geeta Mohan from India Today. I have a question each from both the leadership, beginning with the United Nations Secretary-General, sir. Mr. Guterres, sir, there are allegations and counter-allegations regarding genocide, war crimes, human shields, as also reports of chemical weapons and biological weapons being used. You spoke about contact group and humanitarian corridors. You also spoke about investigations. Will the United Nations look at independent investigations, creating a team, an investigating team, to look into the facts on the ground? And my question to the Foreign Minister, sir, both sides, whether it's the United Nations or the international community, are looking at negotiated settlement and ceasefire. Should Russia look at a negotiated settlement? Is there a country or an organization that could act as a mediator? Who would Russia consider as a mediating agency? Thank you.
Well, the UN Secretariat has not the power to do investigations of that kind. We have the International Criminal Court, we have the different mechanisms that exist in the human rights system, namely commissions of inquiry. It is not my intention to promote an investigation myself. I have not the authority for it. I think it's very important to have independent investigations in order to have full credibility and full accountability.
Now, as for the question addressed to me, first I wanted to say about the positions that the international community is taking and what the UN should think about these positions. Naturally, simultaneously with the inviolable principles of the UN, for example, sovereign equality of states, as I said. Mr. Secretary-General referenced a General Assembly resolution that condemned Russia and the situation, what's happening in the Ukraine. It was deemed an intrusion, invasion, and a violation of territorial integrity. This was a resolution that was voted on. It was not a consensus resolution. Many countries complained that they were forced to vote like that, and the US were capturing ambassadors and pushing them to do that, threatening to use their children going to universities or accounts in the American banks. I'm not exaggerating here. Still, this resolution was not voted unanimously on. Several dozen countries refused to support it. Naturally, every General Assembly resolution is a mandate for the Secretariat, and the Secretariat is explaining its approach here. However, the Security Council resolutions should also be sacred for the Secretariat, especially consensus resolution, when all 15 members vote for a specific solution. And it was through consensus that in February 2015 that the document was endorsed. It was called the Minsk Package of Measures. This paper clearly states there is a need for a direct dialogue between Kiev, Donetsk, and Luhansk in order to settle all issues back then within the territorial integrity of the Ukraine. The only thing that was necessary is to fulfill the obligations that first President Poroshenko signed under, then President Zelensky, and to give a special status to self-declared Donetsk.
And that was Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary-General, and the Russian Foreign Minister speaking at a press conference in Moscow.